Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new podcast series called Make It Make Sense, where I'll be asking my father, MP Anthony Richardson, for his insight into certain topics and issues that we have in our communities and our island here in Bermuda. So to start, broadly speaking, what does Bermuda's economic distribution look like? Talking about industries and jobs, how is it looking based on this last term that PLP has had?
Actually, it's doing quite well. And if you talk about it, different sectors of it, it's going to be the international business versus local economy. And we have been very pleased to report that the economy is doing very well. And one of the measures is actually the amount of revenue that's been raised by payroll tax. And so the payroll tax right now has been much more than was initially estimated. And that reflects, of course, people actually working. And if people are working, they have more money. They have more money they can spend in the economy. And so therefore, as people earn more money, they will go to eat more, they'll be able to pay their rents and do other things and buy things. And so therefore, the economy actually is working very well in that regard. And one of the other evidences is that the government did a mid-year review, which was to distribute an extra $25 million in the economy. And that, again, is evidence that, number one, we're making extra money, and the government itself is showing that it is actually invested in the people, which is why we did this program.
And so, while the economy, broadly speaking, is doing well, are there certain industries that are doing worse than others? Are there some where you've seen lots of growth over this past term and some where you haven't?
Yeah. The international business, of course, is doing very, very well, and that almost speaks for itself. But the local economy is doing well also. And I use the example always of transportation because in many respects, the success of the transportation industry is an indicator of the overall economy. And as you know, from a personal point of view, working at the airport, I know how they're doing because we have to have transport people engaged, right? Ambassadors. And we're now seeing many, many more limousine services, taxi services, and others, which is a broad indicator. It does not mean, of course, that every single sector is doing well. And so sometimes where people say, well, this area is not doing well and others are, but we have to always look at it in terms of the overall economy. And so from that perspective, if you listen to the Premier as Minister of Finance, and also the Honorable Jason Hayward, they will both explain in detail what we are doing, and it definitely is working. The other point is that coming out of COVID, the government introduced what they call the nomad system, whereby people can come to Bermuda and they can live and work for a year. As long as they are able to sustain themselves and to come, you have to invest in either a house or a business, and that's what the impact has been.
Now, while these economic instances might benefit Bermuda on the large scale, what would you say to those who maybe don't have a job right now? Because, for example, while the international business sector can provide lots of stimulus to the economy, the hospitality industry, for example, provides lots of jobs to people that may need them.
Yeah. And so, as an example, we had a lot of discussion about the Fairmont Southampton, and in the House of Assembly, actually, it was quite interesting because initially, there was a proposal to allow them to have a $50 million guarantee to get them off, and then we had to have a conversation about increasing the guarantee from $50 million to $75 million. That was a very interesting discussion, and so that's going to be a huge impact. And now, you may not know, but that project has started in earnest about last November, and so we'll see many more people employed. And the other thing we have to recognize is that construction is doing very well. And if you right now trying to find a good tradesman, you can't find them because they're very, very busy. And so I think that's an indicator that it's not just international business, it's the local economy that's also doing very well in that perspective. But I always go back to what Jason Hayward said, the minister, in that it does not mean that every single person is doing as well as others. One other indicator, though, is that the unemployment rate in Bermuda is 2%. And that means that if you look at it, the majority of Bermudans are in fact employed. And now what we have to do is have people take the time to, if they are not employed in their chosen profession, is to go and get engaged, go and be retrained. And sometimes it requires quite a sacrifice because you have a full-time job and you have to train in the evening time, for example. But the workforce development have done an excellent job in providing all kinds of apprenticeships and whatever for anybody that would really want to train.
Going forward, some people are worried that the international business sector may drastically decrease as a result of the corporate income tax. How has the government structured this corporate income tax to help avoid businesses wanting to leave and doing business elsewhere?
Gotcha. And I think that's one of those misnomers in terms of the corporate income tax is not based in Bermuda. It's an international requirement. And so the conversation is, If you leave Bermuda and go elsewhere, you got to still pay the corporate income tax. And so it's not as though you can go and escape it, right? And what we know from the recent company formations is that companies are coming to Bermuda because of that. And so the conversation now expands into why are companies here? They're not here because of a low tax rate. They're here because of other synergies. And one of the greatest synergies is that if you need to have an insurance product, you can actually find it somewhere close down. So they say that we have like a magic mile almost whereby whatever insurance you need, you can get it very quickly. The other thing that we sometimes forget is that the Bermuda Monetary Authority is well renowned for its actual how it monitors and manages companies, the regulations. And so you also get a world-class regulator by being in Bermuda. And so I think, yes, there may be a few that will leave the island, but we don't expect there's going to be a significant departure because, again, the corporate income tax is not Bermuda-based. It's actually a worldwide requirement.
And are there certain mechanisms within this tax system that helps to incentivize companies to do their business here? I saw things such as the foreign tax credits and a way to make it so that you can defer the losses you may have had in 1 year to help offset the cost in other years. How does that system work?
Yeah. And so you're making me smile now because you know, working at Arch, that you know how it actually works in that it's not as if you make money all the time, you have to build a reserve. And so the same thing would apply in Bermuda in terms of the government knows it's not going to always get the same amount of money. So some years you have highs, some years lows. And so the government will put aside the funds until it actually stabilizes. And what the Premier has done is he has actually used a conservative number, which is 750 million. So at this stage, the number he's using publicly is 750 million that will come from this corporate income tax. Yeah? But the actual number that's expected is much higher than that. And so we'll now give ourselves some time until we know in the longer term, rather, how much it's going to be. And that will be much, much more stable. And from a company perspective, what they'll do is have these credits whereby, let's just say that you are in Bermuda and you want to fund a school and may cost you 25 million. That amount of 25 million can be used as a credit against the tax you otherwise pay. And that's very important. And so in terms of incentivized, there are other things that can be done, but there is the ability to encourage companies that are here to invest in Bermuda and not take away from not cause them to pay more from a corporate income tax point of view. So I think it's quite exciting, to be honest.
Okay, and how do you think that this could broadly impact the life of the average Bermudian having this extra income from the corporate income tax?
It's going to be huge. So in the pre-budget report, the Premier has already talked about some of the impact it's going to have, the Premier as Minister of Finance. And one of those things right away is going to be that when you come back to Bermuda, everybody does this. You come back and you get the duty-free piece. That's going to go from 200 to 300. So right away, everyone that's coming back to the island would have a benefit. And also what they're doing now is they're going to allow all of the vehicle parts that are imported, they're going to be duty-free. So you dent your car, got to get a new door, that's going to be free. And they're also looking at what they're going to do for the building materials. And so right now, you're going to renovate your house. You can bring those goods in, and it's going to be either duty-free or reduced duty. That's going to be a couple of easy examples as to how it's going to work. The other piece of it is going to be that the government has announced they're going to put aside $50 million towards universal health care. And that's going to also obviously have a definite positive impact on all Bermudians.
Okay. And during this current term, a lot of Bermudians have had an increase in struggles that they've had due to COVID-19 and the impacts on the economy, the impacts on inflation. Firstly, how does the government calculate the inflation metric that they use?
How they calculate it? It's calculated in terms of they have a basket of goods. And what people don't know, I think, is that they do go to shops and stuff, and they actually track the various costs. And then they track them from year to year, probably from month to month. And then that's how you calculate the cost of living increase.
So, for example, is there like a very, very wide scope of goods, such as housing, transportation, fuel prices, shopping at the grocery stores and everything?
So you're talking about the actual basket. So there's a basket of goods, and so there are classifications in terms of rent, travel, childcare, and those kind of things. And what the minister, Jason Hayward, has explained is that one of the biggest numbers in that basket is rent. And so if rent goes up by a little bit, it may have a big impact. But over time, rent has not gone up significantly. So people are sometimes making a mistake, I guess, in terms of my rent did not go up or did go up, and why is not the impact? And similarly, it would be maybe the price of eggs. If the price of eggs double, it's not going to have that much of an impact on the cost of living because in the basket, the eggs are not that big a component.
Okay. In an economy, a government doesn't necessarily have complete control over the economy, very far from so.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent can the government impact the economy?
Okay. Maybe I'll take it from the point of view of actual prices, right?
Okay.
Food prices.
Cost of living.
Yeah. So what the government did is in order to have a positive impact on food prices, they reduced the customs duty on what we call essential items. And so the challenge though is eggs again. If the duty on eggs is say 10%, and government takes that off, then the price of eggs should drop. The problem sometimes though is that on a worldwide basis, there's an issue with chickens. And so therefore there are less chickens, so the price of eggs goes up. So even though the government took away the customs duty piece, the price of eggs may not decrease. And so there are a lot of different components as to how we determine actual prices. And of course, there's shipping to Bermuda, there's the prices of fuel and those kind of things. And so my honest comment is that the government does not control the economy. And we have to have more conversations so that we understand how that works. Because right now, a lot of times people blame the government for prices, but government does not have direct control except for reducing its impact, which is going to be possibly customs duty.
Okay. So keeping these limitations in mind,
mm-hmm.
What does the government plan to do in this next term to help minimize negative economic impact on certain individuals?
Gotcha. One of the impacts is the customs duty on fuel imports, which impacts BELCO. And so what the government has done is reduce the import duty on fuel prices by things like 60%. So that's going to have an impact on BELCO prices. The problem though, as I said earlier, is that BELCO price would have been up a lot more. And so by the government having this impact, it's going to cause the price to go up less than it otherwise would. And so it's difficult sometimes because it makes it seem as though nothing's happened. But if the government hadn't done that, then the price would be much higher. One example also is literally getting gas for your car. If the government had not intervened, the price would have been much higher than it is. And so as opposed to remaining stable.
One of the key parts of this government's platform is how they're planning on tackling education reform.
Yes.
First off, what are the problems with the current system that the government needs to tackle?
Well, Mommy has a lot of comments about that because she's a school principal. What has happened before as far back as the Hopkins report is that there was a comment, I suppose, that the level of teaching was not what it could be, and there need to be improvements. And also there were some comments in terms of the middle school system. Before, we had primary school and secondary school, and now we have the middle school in between. And so some conversation is that the middle school system has not worked as it should have. And so now we're going to take some people from middle school, the younger ages, keep them in the lower school, and the other ones will go to the high school. So therefore, we're going to remove the middle school system and also introduce the signature programs. Not signature schools, but signature programs, so that children can choose now at an earlier stage what they're interested in, and then from that, they will hopefully get more consistent exposure to the chosen, to whatever they prefer, and then have a greater benefit. So if you want to do, for example, I don't know, hospitality, you can choose the hospitality stream, and then when you are going through school, you get more and more exposure to hospitality. And when you finish, you should be better trained to go right into hospitality as opposed to having a more general background.
Okay, and with these signature programs, how does the structure work in itself? Is it like, for example, normally you have 8 classes per semester, and maybe 2 of them are electives. So now, for example, is it just that school specifically maybe has more hospitality electives available, so that takes up those last 2 slots, or is it, how might that work?
Yeah. So what happens is, at an early age, I think it's around, let's say 12 or so, you would choose which stream you want to go into. And so if it's hospitality, you would take more courses that are directly involved in hospitality. You still have to do your core, of course, which is going to be mathematics and English and those kind of things, because no matter what you do, you have to have a broad base. But then you're able to focus more on what you choose, if that's what you want to do. However, to be very clear about this, it does not mean that if you don't choose, that you're not going to get a balanced education. So no matter what, you get a balanced education with some focus if that's what you choose to do.
Okay. Um, but why was this seen as the most effective way to do it? Is there not maybe a more cost-effective way to have that sort of specialization without having to have so many changes?
Well, I think one of it is that the middle school piece has been, I think, decided as being one of the challenges in terms of you have children that are, say, you go primary school until age 11, then middle school until age 14, and then high school from 14 to 18. And there's a conversation that that piece is what's not quite working. In some respects, it's because parents don't have as much focus at the middle school level. And other cases, it's the children. And so now the goal is to basically go back to what it was before and ensure that you have just two groups. And then when you transition at age 12 into high school, you have some idea what you want to do, and then hopefully that would be more effective. But also, I think in a more broad sense, there's a conversation that says that the public school system is comprehensive. What that means is everybody's in there, as opposed to the private school system. In the private school system, they can choose who they want and not, not choose who they don't want. You don't have that same flexibility within public education. And so, but as you know, because me and mommy have always maintained that the public system is fine. You and Jordan went through there, and you've done well. But with all of us, the difficult conversation is that parents are not preparing their children to learn, and we're expecting teachers to take our unprepared children and make them, brilliant, and that doesn't work. And so, no one likes that conversation, but I think that's what we have to have in the community in terms of making sure that parents prepare their children to learn, and they will have a much better outcome.
Okay, so are you saying that the reason the public school system seems so negative is because the public school system has to take everybody, whereas in the private school system, if a student is there, their parent has paid money for them to be there, and therefore they would naturally be more involved because someone invested that money into their child?
I have always maintained, I don't think that the public system is negative at all. At all. I think it's everywhere needs improvement. However, my opinion is that you can get a very good education in Bermuda through the public school system. And you're one of those examples. And so if you're focused and you know what you're doing right, the government put in place the dual enrollment program, which means that you can actually finish high school and Bermuda College and at the same time have both of your associate's degree and high school degree and go overseas and perform very, very well. And they've also put in place the college promise program, whereby if the student does well, I think it's at a B level, they can go to Bermuda College without paying tuition. And so that's a huge incentive, and that's part of the public school system. But also, of course, there's always room for improvement in terms of there are children that they learn differently, and we have to be more sensitive to that. And also, I think just recognizing that there are more and more persons in the public system now that need additional assistance, and we have to do that and be honest about that again. Once upon a time, they took all the children with special needs and put them outside of the public system, like different schools, whereas now they're integrated into the overall school system. And so I think that there are many, many more positives, but we have to get to a stage whereby we collectively embrace public education, and then they'll have a better outcome. The other thing real quick is that in many instances, the private schools have been adopted by international business. And so they get huge donations in terms of funding or whatever, which is not the same for public education.
Moving on to another subject, we've all seen what seems to be a huge increase in crime over these past couple of months, couple of years.
Yes.
How have you seen the trend change over these past few years?
Oh, I agree. I mean, clearly there's enough, no, not enough, but there are several gun murders and knife murders and whatever, so that's a huge thing. There's no question about that. The challenge, though, I think, is number one, I keep using the same word now, we are not honest about that in terms of our families. And so we know within our families what our children are doing, right? But we're not prepared to take action. That's a huge part to start with. And the other part is that we in the community don't really have good mechanisms for dispute resolution. And what I mean by that is in the public discourse, if you do something that I don't like, even as a politician, right, we will criticize you verbally in a very negative way. And the message to the community is that's how we're supposed to act. And so I think we have to do better in terms of our own dispute resolution, and that'll have a big impact. And of course, we have to be serious about this in terms of when we see our children at a young age that are becoming dysfunctional or having social challenges, we have to be prepared to intervene. And now you have some cases whereby parents are afraid of the child at age like 12. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, just imagine you telling me what to do when you're 12 years old. That makes no sense at all. But in some cases, many cases, actually, unfortunately, the parents themselves are not prepared to, in my words, be parents.
And so why do you think it has changed? Because it's not like there are a whole bunch of new people that have just come out of nowhere in the past 2 years. Why is it different now as opposed to 2 years ago or 3 years ago?
Well, that's a big conversation. Some people would say that it's because we have legally caused people not to be able to properly discipline their children. I'm not expecting people to beat their children, that's for sure, right? But we're at a stage now whereby in schools and at home, you cannot exercise your parental rights. And I think as a result, parents have given up that right. And now we just don't do it. I mean, one example is this, right? Which many don't agree, is just use of profanity. Now it's just used all over the place. And I think that that's a small indication of how we are starting to become more and more, in my words, loose as a society. And so parents may use profanity, but now children do so also in their parents' presence, and the parents don't do anything. And so again, that's in my mind, a small indication as to how we are allowing ourselves to become less disciplined.
And how does the government plan to tackle these issues with crime through programs, through legislation? What's in your mind?
Sure. One of the big implications is Minister Weeks, I would imagine, and Minister Tanae Farbit. There are lots of intervention programs that are available to assist persons, parents, and children at a younger age. And there is the restorative justice mechanism, which is done by Cordell Riley, your godfather, of course, who is heavily involved in that. And there are other programs that are available. And what's been interesting is, even with Minister Kim Wilson, Minister of Health, during the mid-year review, when they boosted the economy or boosted the revenue by 25 million, she was given money as the Minister of Health to have programs in schools whereby you help children to better manage disputes.
Okay. Do you know how we used to have the trash collection system where it was twice a week?
Yeah.
Why did that change to once a week?
Well, Colonel Brash will be happy you asked that question. The reason is that when we had twice a week collection, there were so many times whereby the trash trucks and others had issues and did not get collected. And so trash would be left on the roadside, for significant periods of time. And so with the trash collection once a week, there is more certainty. But that's one of those things also whereby I think that we as a people can do better. Take your trash to the dump. And not everyone can do that, but those that can should do so, as opposed to leave things around. And the other thing is that, of course, some people, trash day is, say, Friday, they'll take the trash out late and leave it there until next week Friday, as opposed to take the trash out early, and if for some reason it's missed, take the trash back home or to the dump. Again, difficult conversation, but it is what it is. We can go and take our trash to the waste facility if we choose to do so.
Is there no way to maybe do a hybrid system where it's not twice a week, but maybe every 4 business days, for example, so that it can get collected a bit more often?
I mean, that can happen, but right now, and I think Colonel Brash would endorse this, not at least, but there is certainty now. Every day which day your trash is getting picked up, and the goal is to make sure it's picked up when it's supposed to be. And that actually helps to eliminate any issues.
Keeping along this line, sort of, through infrastructure and whatnot, what's the issue with the roads right now?
The roads, okay. Colonel Birch has first of all apologized because we know that the roads are not in any way, shape, or form the way they used to be. However, what Belco did is agree to replace its infrastructure, which meant that many roads have been dug up, a lot of roads, right? And so now, as they replace those cables and put the asphalt back on, it takes a while for the road to properly settle. And so they do it, unless they cover it temporarily. It takes, I think, about 12 months before it can actually settle, before you can put the final layer on. That's number one. Number two, it's purely very, very expensive. And number three is that the asphalt plant that we have, there are two, one run by Eastern Asphalt, one run by government. They keep on, in my words, they break down too often. And so the government has decided now to actually invest in a new asphalt plant. And Colonel Birch was on TV the other day that the plant is here, worth like $1 million. It'll be about a year though before they can actually get it up and running. In the meantime, there is a significant partnership between the government and Eastern Asphalt to ensure that things get done. And the most recent communication from Colonel Birch is that they are now working in the West to get things going. And if Balco is not able to keep up, for example, then they'll make other decisions. But the roads are now being repaired as best they can. The other point, too, is we have to be careful about how we drive. The roads are bad, and our driving is bad, as opposed to let's take our time. That'll have less of an impact than it is at the moment.
So since these roads had to be dug up by Belco to replace the infrastructure, is it Belco that's paying for this asphalt, or is it the government?
Actually, I believe it's a combination that the government and Belco are sharing, because what the government also decided is that if the roads are going to be excavated, for example, then or trenching, then what they will do is ensure that all other stuff is replaced. And so it's not just Belco now, it's Belco, telecommunications, the government, and otherwise, so that you don't have to keep on digging up the road every 5 seconds. And so I think they've agreed now to share the cost of repaving.
Okay. And to wrap this up, why are you running? What's your reason for being here in this election?
Do you know, to everybody, that has been one of the biggest questions for me, is to really, like, why am I running? And as I went through the process, I'm running because it really is about carrying on what I've been doing and making it better. What I mean by that is that I have been actually doing a lot of things to help people, and people don't know that I've spent maybe like $40,000, in terms of whether it be my program, which is to ensure or to improve financial literacy, whether it be food distribution, whether it be helping people. I've done all these kind of things, right, and spending money, which is fine. But what I realize is that I have to better adapt to having people help themselves. What I mean by that is that if you need money, rather than give it to you, make sure that you're able to get employment. If you're a parent, for example, and you have some needs, make sure that you're able to improve your employment. And so for me, the word is I'm going to move from helping to empowering people. That's my goal. And in a more detailed way, it's going to be to ensure that in the actual community down Davos Hill, for example, that I continue to work on getting the club to become more of a community center. At the moment, I serve as the assistant treasurer, and part of that was to be on the executive and understand the dynamics of the club, and then we'll work towards that. And one of my things, not just me, but one thing that we've done is, in the past, the club was basically one building. And so when children were there, when you use the bathroom, they had to go downstairs through the bar. Now they've separated, whereby you can have children upstairs and they don't have to go downstairs to the bar. And so upstairs is now pretty much self-contained, and we can have community events, like a child's birthday party, for example, and you can actually be completely separate. There's separate entrance upstairs, no bathrooms, bathrooms upstairs also, and so it's much more community-oriented. And so, yeah, that's for me, that's actually huge.
And what are you looking to change going forward, maybe in a more broad sense, in the House of Parliament, not just in the community?
Sure. Well, I've had my first term for the past 4 years, right? And I've gotten used to it. I've gotten adjusted to it, so now I better understand. And one of the things that I think is critical is to be able to be, as they say, to be in the room when having the conversation. In this case, when they are debating legislation. Me in the House of Assembly, I can speak to it spontaneously. And a lot of times what happens is we go there and we are prepared, but then the opposition, the OBA, for example, may say something different, and then it's for us to be able to be there and to be able to respond to and explain a different perspective. And one example, by the way, was, we talked about it earlier, with the Fairmont Southampton, we were debating going from $50 million to $75 million. And the OBA said certain things, and I was able to, with my financial background, interject and explain why and how the $75 million actually does make sense. And real quick, what I explained is that when it comes to financing, it's not a science in terms of something being exact, it's an art. And so there's a way by which you can talk and explain how lending does work. It's not as if, again, it's not exact. It's an art what you do. And we believed, and I believe for sure, that the $75 million loan for Fairmont Southampton does make sense, and it's going to, well, not going to, it has now helped them to get the appropriate financing, whereby the project is now signed off and it's on its way to make a big improvement for the community.
Well, thanks for sitting down and talking to us today. You'll be able to find this podcast on many platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. and we hope that you'll come back and tune in next week for our next iteration of Make It Make Sense.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to Kallan, my son, for doing this. And it's interesting because this is what we do at home on a regular basis at the kitchen table, to be honest, whereby Kallan will come and say, well, Daddy, I agree or don't agree. And I have to be able to respond to him in a very spontaneous way. My last comment, which actually will make some of you smile, is that obviously I'm running as the PLP candidate in C7 Hamilton South. And one day I asked Kallan, is he going to vote for me? And guess what he said? Well, Daddy, that depends. On what? On what you're putting down. And so part of this is part of that, really, is to, in a public way, explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, not just for Kallan, but also for you, in the listening audience, to come and vote for me, C7 Hamilton South, on February 18th. So again, thank you, and thank you, Kallan, for doing this. It's been interesting, to hear your perspective on different things. Look forward to other opportunities and hearing what your perspective is. As a young person, by the way, people recognize that this is going to be your first time to vote because you were just able to register. Now as you're beyond 18, and look forward to you and others voting on February 18th. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.